Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome back to Procrastination Pit Stop. We have another amazing guest for you here today. I am sitting with Jeremy Durgana, who is a versatile Canadian actor and musician who is known for his roles in productions like The Handmaid's Tale, Chucky, See, and The 12 Monkeys, as well as for his work in bilingual marketing campaigns for brands like Hyundai and Tim Hortons. Fluent in multiple languages and armed with degrees in marketing, computer science, and education. He also has ventured into combat sports journalism through his web series and also contributed behind the scenes in broadcast media for Bell Media. Jeremy, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Chris. Thank you very much for having me here today. And I'll try to deliver on that tremendous introduction that you just presented to the audience here today. So I certainly hope that I can deliver, give you your bang for your buck. But I think I'm optimistic. I'm optimistic that we will deliver, Chris.
I love that attitude, and of course we will, because whatever needs to come out is going to come out. That's my way of looking at it.
Oh yeah.
But before we dive into it, we do like to have an icebreaker on the show, and the question for you today is: which cartoon character do you resonate with the most, and why?
The cartoon characters. Let me think here for a second. When I was growing up, you see, you put me in a tough spot, and I'll tell you why. And I've seen memes on this lately. I grew up during the golden age of cartoons. Okay, we're talking the Brave Stars, the Thundercats, the Silver Hawks. And then there's GI Joe, Hulk Hogan's Rock and Roll Wrestling, baby. Okay, and then there's the children one, right? Like the Alvin and the Chipmunks, the Smurfs. So you really threw me in for a loop there because if you asked a question to another generation, they just have one option. That's SpongeBob SquarePants. But in my case, I've got to come out with like this Mount Rushmore, this roster for you. So when you're looking at like Hulk Hogan's Rock and Roll Wrestling, it's the entire the entire cartoon of Roddy Piper, the Junkyard Dog JYD, Andre the Giant, Tito Santana, Hulk Hogan. But then when it comes to just characters and what they stood for, and innovation as well, and not just that, but increasing and empowering me, and also improving my lexicon. Transformers, So I'm going to go with Transformers here. Okay, we're talking about engineering ahead of their time, and if you look at the cartoons and you listen to the animation, to the animated characters and their words and what they would convey, it was definitely it definitely augmented my vocabulary. That's for sure. I was looking at that the other day, and I was thinking to myself, my goodness, they were using these words in those cartoons at the time. Oh yeah, no, I just found that fascinating. So I'll go with Transformers, Optimus Prime.
I like that one.
Chris.
Oh, mine's really easy and kind of dull in comparison to that. Mine is Deadpool.
Deadpool. Okay.
Yeah, not so much because of the violence or what he does as a mercenary. Although I guess part of that did tie into my personality earlier on, but it's more about talking to that fourth wall, because I do that sometimes. Like I'm talking to somebody like the audience of Universe God or whatever, and we sometimes do that and say, hey, what's with this train wreck? Or I deflect with humor a lot, so I do have that sort of same trait. And also, I just want to have purpose. Where Deadpool is he's always just wanted to have meaning, right? And that's sort of how he fell into being the mercenary, right? So,
Well, I appreciate that question. And it's funny because as we talk now, I'm starting to resurrect some childhood memories of other cartoons. I mean, He-Man was another one. And you know what? Even though there were cartoons that were, okay, I get it. They were designed for various segments of the populace and different demographics. I still found myself turning into, see what Gem was all about. Remember Gem? So I gave them all a shot. And you're right. I mean, if we start looking at Marvel and DC, my goodness, that's a different universe in itself. And I've always been fascinated by the people who uh, understood the intricacies of all those various universes, which is DC, Marvel, and then we can move into like the Simpsons universe, and then we get into like the Star Wars and Star Trek, and then and then we talk about like the wrestling universe. These are different, I don't know, universes, I guess if you want to call that, where like there's this just vast um, uh, uh, array of just storylines and the genesis of different characters. I always wondered which I hate to say this term, but since we're upon Comic Con season for different cities, which and I know it's your show, Chris. So I'm sorry. I apologize for asking the questions to you when really you should be asking me the questions. I know it's a faux pas here, but now I'm enthusiastic about this topic. Universe has the most I don't know I don't want to use the word intelligent, but astute like nerds when it comes to like retaining all the information from like the get go where the characters started and what would have happened if when and what happened when and like is it Star Trek? Is it Star Wars? Is it pro wrestling? Is it Marvel? Is it DC? Because you could talk to somebody on the surface level, but when you start talking to the aficionados then you start getting into that, okay, the test of strength, like how much does this guy know? How much does this girl know? And then you're digging deep back into like these references into comic books where you're going, oh, you got to be a nerd to know that one. Which universe has that congregation of nerds where you're like, okay, they know their stuff and you can't go any deeper than this?
That is a really loaded, difficult question, but I would probably say that the most in-depth universe as of right now, actually, I'm not even sure, but I do know that it would probably be either Marvel or Star Wars, and the reason is that Star Wars not only had its own series, but it had its own, every sort of universe has its own fan fiction. But I mean, Star Wars had so many authors and books that were added into the main series that actually George Lucas signed off on. That it is got to be one of the most massive amounts. I mean, what was his name? Timothy Calhoun. He wrote quite a few Star Wars novels about, like Mara Jade or like some of these other lesser known characters, and these are best selling books. So I would say without even looking into it, it would have to be either Star Wars or again Marvel because Marvel came out with that What If series again. So now they've I guess they're trying to keep up with the times. But I mean, if you look at the sheer number of Star Wars books that are offshoots and backstories, it's a lot.
Interesting. And I appreciate you having that conversation with me because I've presented this question to people within my own firmament, within my own realm. So we're biased when we talk about it because ours is it's the world of the fictional world of pro wrestling, and I can give a litany of reasons as to why we picked that, but I never had a chance to talk to someone outside of that realm, and I always figured it would be Star Wars.
Well, I don't know if I'm right. I just know that it's got a ton of books, like a ton of like I mean the amount of material versus what is it 10 movies now. But the universe is just so vast that they had all these other writers, right? And it's just not like fan fiction where lots of stories exist, but they don't necessarily jive with the entire sort of storyline. There are quite a few that do, so that's why it's only why I chose.
I spoke to someone recently, and I was going to give this character, but I didn't want to just because a friend of mine. It's the character that resonates with him, which led to the genesis of a book that I wrote, bestseller by the way, which we'll talk about later on. But for him, it was Mighty Mouse, and truthfully, that was someone who resonated with me as well because of his stature, being 5 feet 3 inches, and I'm not 6'1", I'm not 6'5", I'm in that five range. So for simplicity about overcoming obstacles as a little guy, it would have been him because it was someone else's inspiration. I chose to. I've got to be original. We can't go off copying, but that's another character as well. A little my
I like that, and actually, it's a good segue into kind of the topics of today. So the first kind of question would be, how do you define procrastination, Jeremy, and what does it mean to you personally?
oh geez, Chris, man, I'm telling you, wow. When I was growing up, I I struggled with this problem. I really did. And I did for many reasons. One is I didn't want to initiate and even start a project out of fear, out of being concerned about what was the right first step versus the incorrect first step. Coming from a very strict household as well, it's like walking a tightrope. Also, an insurmountable task, something that might be mountainous, that might have multiple steps. It's like, where do I even start? Which is rather interesting because when we talked about that question at the beginning, which was, your favorite cartoon character or animated character, one of the reasons why I don't even delve into some of those worlds, like let's say Star Wars or something, is because it's like, where do I even start? And what I'm trying to draw here is a parallel between, entering that and, just a project or our day to day tasks. And it's like, okay, I know I've got to correct some things in my life, I've got to change the trajectory, let's go down the meaningful path here, but where do I begin? So I remember there was a Professor Jordan Peterson who just said something like, just start with cleaning your bedroom. And it's true. It's really just, I wouldn't say, it's okay, clean your bedroom, but it has to be with a small victory. A small victory, a small step, and it could be, yes, it can either be organizing something, a purge of getting rid of all the papers you've accumulated, things like just your daily routine of what you do around the house or the place, cleaning up, maybe your exercise routine. For me, that's what it was because, Chris, we're talking about an individual here who was 250 pounds of obesity, fat. My first day in high school gym was the day that killed my social life. I mean, my phys ed teacher started the gym class with shirts versus skins. That's the era that I come from. And what did he do? He placed the 250 pounder, the guy with the endomorphic frame, on team skins. Whereas these days we've got pennies. You've got team red versus team green. I was going to say team blue, but coming from coming from the realm of education where I'm a high school, or I teach in schools, you're discouraged from using red versus blue because somehow there's a connotation between Bloods versus Crips. It's true that's so we do team green versus team blue and team red versus team yellow or something. But what I'm trying to get at is I come from that era of shirts versus skin. So just on the physical part, it's like, where do I even begin? And you're talking about someone who's 13 or 14 years old, minus the the YouTube era and minus YouTube and you know inspirational speakers who can generate a multitude of ideas of how to combat weight and ideas. It was just, here's your gym teacher. This is what he says. And then you've got parents who aren't really astute when it comes to their micros and their macros and proteins and proper nutrition. You're just there, either sink or swim. So I had to battle that alone. So when I learned how to just change my health, everything else started to fall into place. And that meant academics, goal setting, and without trying to overinflate things about myself. In many aspects, I've overcompensated and even overachieved in many areas, in areas that I never thought that I would. I mean, you read my bio at the beginning. I'm a full time teacher, and for most people, that's where it begins and it ends. Their day ends at, first bell, oh Canada, and it ends when it's 3:05. In my case, the day begins at 3:05. And that could mean coaching sports right after. That could mean right now some projects that I'm working on. I'm working on the musical for the school, so that's like the rehearsals. And then when you're done with that, then comes auditions, self tapes, acting school, dancing lessons, working with people on speech so that I can become a better orator, becoming a better speaker, learning different, working on honing those different languages as well. We talked about, me being a polyglot, which is basically being able to speak a variety of different languages. The learning never ends. And then I also work on music because I'm a musician as well. And then writing, I just published a book that is on the Amazon bestsellers list as a first time writer. And we've just received two awards, one from the New York Book Festival as a runner up, the other one being an honorable mention at the Hollywood Book Festival, and then being an award winner with the Literary Titan Book Awards. And we've been nominated for other awards as well. And we're going to be hearing about those awards in the next few weeks because right now, similar to films, when it comes to books, we're in what we call award season. So a lot of these would have been submitted around September and October of 2024, and we're going to start hearing about those awards now. And the book that I wrote touches on this of you know, the mind telling you, hey, we can do this. And if the mind can convince you to do things, then it sets everything else into motion. And where does it start? It starts with those little victories. Going back to your original question, Chris, which is let's just start organizing my bedroom. Let's buy some containers so we can place things in various containers in the bedroom. Then it comes to let's organize some papers and let's do some filing. It's tax season now. How many people are going to be scrambling around looking for sheets, documents that they need to file taxes? Whereas it starts off with this is the RSP contributions I made. Let's make those printouts and file them away. And you do them months in advance. You actually can't do them months in advance. You have to wait for the bank to release them at a certain time. What I mean is there are other types of documents that you can file in advance. If you're a part of a union and you're paying union fees and dues, you start collecting those receipts ahead of time. So it all boils down to small victories, my friends, small victories.
No, no, thank you for sharing that. And you make a lot of really good points. I'll touch on some of them there. When you talked about cleaning your room, you might, some people might find this funny, but if you want a really small victory that's going to give you a lot of benefit, and I can't tell you how long it's going to take because everybody's different, but just clean your toilet. Like seriously, just clean your toilet. Like it doesn't have to be like a soap and water type thing, but you can get some wet wipes and you can like clean around the inside or the seat and things like that. And it helps you not only tick something off, but there's something that happens, and don't quote me on this. That this is I got this from some Japanese ikigai and some other philosophies as well. They just by doing that, you're doing something for yourself. It's deeply personal. You're looking and dealing with, quote unquote, perhaps the worst aspects of you that come out, right? And it just helps you to sort of set that mood. Going on to what you said about not knowing where to start, this is what I love about big tasks. And I mean, we have tasks that, you have to do in a certain order, like laundry. Like laundry, you have to do it a certain way. Because, if you don't pick up the clothes, you can't jump to washing or drying, right? And you also can't jump from, picking up the clothes to just the dryer either. So there are certain things that you can't. But when you're talking bigger tasks and bigger things, even George Lucas in Star Wars started in the middle. Such a big story, such a vast universe. He actually started in the middle. I mean, the first Star Wars movie that came out was A New Hope, and it was the fifth story in the series. So, for a lot of big tasks, I think we need to get out of the mindset that there's only one way to do it. And then if we break it down and what needs to be done for that big task, jumping between 1 and 3 sometimes doesn't even matter.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. What you're saying resonates with me on so many levels. The first one is the tasks. In the world of education, we call it chunking, which is where you're taking a big project, but you're working on little pieces at a time until you finally get from point A to point Z. We're Canadian here, so we're going to say point Z, not point Z. Yes, so chunking in my world, and you've described it and you articulated that in a different way, but it's the same thing. And something else that resonates with me is also the cleaning aspect. And it's true. I clean my bathroom and my toilet every day. And that whole idea of, I'm going to clean on cleaning day, which means that, there's a candy wrapper or there's a crumb or there's a spill or something. There's something on the counter that turns it into crusty or gritty. It's like, well, I'll just wait until Saturday to clean it up. No, but in my world, that's how it used to be back in my world. But now it's like, well, cleaning day was 5 minutes ago, and it's going to be 5 minutes from now when I make make the next mess. Like it's ongoing. You clean as you go along. So you're right. Just little things like the washroom, and by the way, it could be different things every day. Like one day could be the toilet. The next day is let me clean the sink. The other is just shining up the mirror, and then the next is the bathtub, as opposed to this one arduous task that's on Saturday, and it's like, let's face it, Saturday rolls around and you're looking at the remains and you're looking at what's there to be cleaned, and sometimes it's not exactly all too encouraging. It's like, I got to get the gloves on. But if you clean as you go along, it's like you don't even realize that there is anything to clean. Like it's like you really don't have to wait until Saturday because everything's already done. But yeah, that's something that resonated with me. And I'm going just back to this book because one of the things that I touched on is we have a chapter at the end of this book that has resources like what we call graphic organizers in school. They've got what they call the Venn diagram. We have checklists. So the point that I'm trying to make is if you've got to go to work the next day or you've got to go to school the next day, and let's face it, there's a lot of people who are running behind the clock because they choose their wardrobe at that moment, or they then decide to pack their bags, the morning of. It's like we've got like lists in here where it's like, okay, on Wednesday, what kind of things do you need for your bag? Well, on a Wednesday or on a Monday or a Tuesday, let's pack the bag the night before. Let's have the clothing laid out the night before so that you're not overwhelmed with that task on the morning of, and then the next thing you know, you're running behind on the clock. And then let's face it, I'm sure we can all connect, and this is happening in all of our lives. Just leaving like 5 or 10 minutes before can make the big difference in like whether or not you're a part of that bottleneck on the highway. I don't know if you've ever noticed, but where I am, we've got this main artery. It's called the Highway 400, okay, and the 400 connects to this other highway called the 401. Now, the other day, my brother and I were driving, and it's like we've been using that artery for I guess decades at this point, and it was just shocking me that we're like, my goodness, like it all boils down to 2 lanes that takes you from one major artery here in Ontario onto the next one. And it's just 2 lanes that do that. And in my case, leaving 5 or 10 minutes ahead of time can make the big difference as to whether or not you're a part of that clog, that bottleneck, that system. And it's like those things that you said. It's like little victories, laying out the clothing. How many of us we wake up and it's like, where's my sock? Where's the other sock? Where's the other half to this pair? Oh my goodness! And that's how the morning starts. So if you could get all that down ahead of time, then you've prevailed. You've won at least one victory, or that's redundant. You've at least won one battle.
No, I like the way that you say that too. And yes, a lot of, that it's a mathematical, what was it? A mathematical conundrum when for every 10 minutes you're late, if you have to travel somewhere, it actually turns out to be 30 to 40 minutes. It's so weird.
I agree. I don't know how to I'm not sure how they came up with the math for that, but that makes sense to me.
And just going back to the book, they say that writing a book is 98% procrastination and 2% actually doing it. How true is that for you?
Chris, I'm so happy that you've asked that question, and let's put it this way. The reason why I bring this book up is because I'll tell you what it symbolizes and what it's emblematic of. It is overcoming procrastination because when I was a young man growing up, this idea would never have been a concept in my mind. Like, sure, I appreciated writing and I liked it, but my starting point, like, how do I even begin a report? How do I even begin an essay to elevating and graduating to the point where I can actually put out a book on someone's life? It's a memoir, by the way, on an individual named Joe Mewey, who has tremendous accolades in NCAA sports and the world of academics as well. And he parlayed all of that and transferred his skills into business. But going back to your question, that's when I made a video called 5 Writing Tips. And I use it for my students, but I also have made it available to all authors as well. And one of those is you have to create the hard deadlines. In other words, if I'm going to sit down with a subject, meaning in this case Joe Mewey, who went to Cornell University, if I'm going to pick his brain for 2 hours on a Saturday, I've got to make it this obligation and a hard deadline that by the end of the week, after that 7-day cycle before the next interview with him, a chapter has to be written. And don't get me wrong, Chris, there was a saying by a famous author. I forgot his name because it slipped my mind, but his saying was that the first draft of anything is, and it's the S word. So in other words, so what I'm saying is within that 7-day period of interview 1 to interview 2, I've written a chapter I know that I'll have to go back and refine and edit it. And I'm not, this is not hyperbole, 1,000 times, okay? I've got to go back and touch things up 1,000 times. But the bottom line is, hey, I put that chapter down on paper. It's done. I took the meat and potatoes out of this guy's story and made that, chapter one, or the introduction of his life. The next time I meet him, we're doing this thing chronologically. We're going to hear about part two of his life. And then before you know it, 18 weeks goes by and 18 chapters have been done. So for a first time author, Chris, I've had people ask, well, how long did it take you? And to be honest, it's supposed to take a couple of years, 2 to 3 years to put out a book. And in my case, it took about a year, roughly a year, to put that book out. When I say put that book out, it doesn't mean that it was, first interview to now it's on Amazon. It didn't take a year. That took about 2 years. But I'm talking about to have a first draft, in other words, a manuscript, as they call it. A first draft, it took about a year because I had to set hard deadlines and I'd revisit, add some more details. In the form of writing, you just can't create a timeline of, this is what happened on this date, and this is what happened in this year, and before you know it, just turns into a Wikipedia page, which no one really wants to buy. So you've got to add the entertainment to it, and that's what takes a lot of time as well. It's making things sound very dramatic and adding drama to the story. So going to your question, setting hard deadlines. And then making sure that you're writing something down. Number two, that was get it on paper. Number three is you've got to have a storyboard. So prior to even writing, you're sitting down with someone before you even ask for details about their lives. And it's like, how do you want the story to go? Like, do you want this thing to be in chronological order, which it should be? And you can use creative liberties to jump in the timeline, which is that I took a risk and jumped in the timeline because I want to write it as if you were watching a movie. Uh, and after creating a storyboard, then comes the process. But that all starts with learning how to write an essay, learning how to write a basic book report in grade 9. Believe it or not, and this is what made me feel a little bit more comfortable in my skin. When I got to university, I remember walking in one of the hallways and I saw a bulletin board. And the bulletin board would typically have all the kinds of clubs that people could be welcomed into, whether it's a reading club, a Bible study club, a sports club, a band that's looking for a bassist or someone, or just a dramatic arts club. There was a club there that was about procrastination. They had people there that would walk you through the steps of how to overcoming that problem. And that's what it occurred to me. That was my revelation of, oh my goodness, I didn't know that this was really a big issue. It was always designed, when I say it was always designed, I'm talking about whether it was guidance counselors or parents, it was almost presented in a way that, I was the problem here. Like it was like, you've got this issue, so you better tighten up the belt, boy, because that was the generation that we were from. It's like if you've got an issue, fix it. And you didn't really have resources. You really didn't know who to turn to, and you're almost made to believe that you were the problem. And unfortunately, Chris, if someone tells you that every day, you start to believe that you are a problem, and you start to also feel worthless in many ways, unfortunately. But when I got to university, I realized, oh my goodness, there's a workshop for people who have this problem. See, thankfully, with your platform, you're giving everybody an opportunity to voice something. You're giving other people who are having this challenge in their lives a chance to listen to other stories that resonate with them, and they understand these are ways that I can overcome this. This is a technique that I can use to overcome this challenge. This was never around back in those days. So with the advent of the internet and the opportunities that have been just bestowed upon us to give platforms for topics that are meaningful, as opposed to what we talked about earlier on. What you watch on TV is not necessarily meaningful all the time. It's like, what kind of information are you really filling into into your viewers? Thankfully, with platforms like yours, we can actually address real needs and address the critical needs of. And back in my day, it was like I was allowed to attend a workshop, and I just stumbled upon it, and stumbled upon the fact that, oh, there are other people with this issue called, procrastination. And I wish that there were platforms like yours along.
Well, thank you for sharing that. I do feel like I want to take it just a quick aside too, just to expand on that a little bit. In that, you're very right. You are not the problem. Procrastination at its core is actually it's a misplaced defense mechanism. So it's not that you're broken, it's not that you're lazy, it's not that you need fixing. It's just programming that you learn likely from a very young age in how to handle certain things and how to survive in the world. And that has just turned into the procrastination later on because the job of our ego is to keep us safe, right? It's just that we can't tell the difference between like a gun to our head or a math test. Brain considers that the same thing. Go figure. For something that's supposed to be so smart, right? And just going off of that, I did have another question for you that's always been in my mind, especially now that we have podcasts, like you said, we have YouTube channels, we have TikToks, we have forums, we have social media, we have movies, we have video, long form, short form. Why did you focus on the book format for this particular story that you wanted to get out?
Yeah, I focused on the book format for a couple of reasons. Reason number one, and this is, we could say, selfish reasons. The first reason is it's always been on my list of things to do. I've always been jonesing to write a book. I wrote in the past, as we alluded to earlier on, for Bell Media, writing sports synopses, movie synopses. Um, when you're about to watch a movie on TV or a sporting program on pay-per-view, and before ordering it, you're reading about the description. You're reading a synopsis of what you're about to order. I was the guy who composed those in both English and French on that platform for several years, and then that would then be used on their websites. It would then be used on what they called their TV guide. That's an artifact by today's talk or by today's speech in little pieces. But I've always wanted to write a book, but I just never found the topic. I'm sure I want to write one of my life, but it was like, I still have several years ahead here. I'm assuming that I've got some mileage left, so I wasn't going to put out a book on my life quite yet. But I came across someone who told me a little bit about his life, and his story was worthy of being shared because of the lessons that can be taken from the book. So we decided to go with the book format because the people that we were targeting, as far as like our target audience goes, this would have been their medium. This would have been their form of obtaining information. It would have been through the form of a book. The person I'm writing about is 70 something years old. So that would have been a way to connect to that audience. And now we're working on the audio version, something that would be available on the internet. Because as someone who believes strongly in the message of a book, which is overcoming obstacles through perseverance, it's the book that's for sale. Like it's the book that we monetize on mightyjoemui.com. It's MUI. That's how his last name is spelled. But when you go there, it's amazing that we got on the bestsellers list because I've got the electronic version available for free for anyone because I strongly believe in the message that's behind the book. So considering that we're giving away the electronic version for free, it's a PDF, so you don't really have to have any fancy platforms for it. You can just download it to your phone and you can read it on the subway or on a road trip. Or it was really designed, actually, going back to your question now, it was designed to actually offer somebody reading material when they're flying from point A to point B at an airport. Like we really want to get it for people who are traveling. And it's like, what can someone read when they're flying from Toronto to LA? This is the book. And it covers, if we're looking at like estimated time that it takes to read, it covers that. It's a 2 to 2.5 hour read. So, and then you can go back and peruse if you want. So about 3 hours. And that's just suitable enough for someone to read when they're traveling. That was the reason why. So we are working on an audio book that will be available online that will be for free on the YouTube channel. And we also have the PDF. But the book itself was created for that reason. One, for people who would travel, for people who want to, improve the way that they run their day-to-day operations, because there's still a lot of people out there who enjoy just the format of a book. They still like the feel and the smell of a book, my friend. We still have it available for them. Ultimately, we'd like to see this on screen, though.
No, no. Thank you for taking that into, giving that answer. It's always interesting to me because there's so many people, and actually, you touched on something very interesting too. You said that, and I'm paraphrasing here. You said that you felt like maybe it wasn't time for you to write your book yet because you still had some time left. But, you know, that to me, I'd like to challenge that just a little bit and say that it's not about the length of time. It's about the experiences, right? So, I mean, I firmly believe that you could have a book not written by a 12-year-old maybe, but maybe written by somebody who's taken the anecdotes of that 12-year-old story. And I mean, actually, I think we have a book like that that was written like that. Again, I'm by no means an expert on the subject, but um, when you wrote about like some of these people in history books, some of these kings, some of these princes, some of these queens, you have to understand that back in the day, they lived to be maybe 40. So, I mean, when they were king or queen, they were, 12, 13, 14, waging wars and stuff. All that, I guess, in a roundabout way, just to sort of say, if you have a story, get it out and write it. You know,
I appreciate that, and you know what? I really needed to hear that. And the reason why I've been apprehensive, or there's been some consternation here, and it's I guess people out there might in TV land might be able to understand this. Sometimes I guess when you're around the closest people to you, they're not always supportive, and it's almost been driven into my head that if I was to put one out on myself, let's say a book with my experiences. I have to admit that with the experiences I have, I feel like I've got the experiences of a 70-year-old guy here. It's almost like you hear time and time again that like who the hell do you think you are to write a book at your age? Like, are you pretentious? Are you really that pretentious? And and you start to hear that from people. Unfortunately, it's people that are around you, and they're the closest people who should be your cheerleaders. And you start to go, you know what? Maybe that's true. Like how presumptuous or how pretentious can I be to put out a memoir on my life? And it's like there are meaningful stories. We've had a conversation in the past where I got emotional talking to you in the past, Chris. A lot of people don't know this behind the scenes scoop, and those are stories that are they would play out very well on a Netflix series. Trust me, but it's just there's this block of well, do I have another 20 years left so that I can give people the comprehensive, definitive version of the book? But with what I've got so far, I've got enough for a volume, that's for sure. But I've always felt like if I put one out, will I be accused of, who's this guy think he is for putting out a story? And he still has another 20 years to go, and he's got a memoir out, and that's really something I don't want to be accused of. And going back to a question that you had earlier on, I know we're jumping, but I felt like I didn't really give you the extensive answer. You asked something about, when you put out a book, you said something about 98% of it being procrastination and 2% of it, I guess, getting the ball going here. I have to admit that there's something that's a precursor here. And that goes back to when I was 250 pounds with a size 45 waist. And my brother once told me, he said, the hardest two steps for a runner, or I guess for anybody who works out, the hardest two steps are the first two out of the door of your house, I guess. And I'm sure that it could be phrased and said in a more eloquent manner, but it's true. Like if I was to run or sprint or do my first jog or something like that, my first mile in my journey, truly, it really is the hardest two steps are the first two out of your door. And the same thing with writing the book. So prior to getting to the book, I had to be that 250-pound guy. I had to have that size 45 waist. I had to be emasculated in high school on my first day in front of the girls because the girls had their phys ed class a few yards away from the guys. Even though that killed my social life, that had to happen in order for this to happen. That had to happen before I entered a dojo and took my first rolling session in jiu-jitsu to build the character. That was in sync with running laps and the weight loss, and that all came together. That was all working in a synchronous manner. That all had to happen before putting out the book. If none of that had occurred, if that didn't predate and there was no precursor, I don't think we'd be talking about a book. And to be honest, I don't even think I'd be an eligible guest today on your platform. I wouldn't have this conversation with you.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Jeremy. And I hope that that message reaches somebody else out there as well. That you know, we've all got those things. And I would like to slide back just a little bit because I don't want people to think that I'm leaving it and ignoring the quote unquote elephant in the room. It's important to know that yes, when we want to do something in life and it's a little bit scary or it's outside of what we normally do, we expect that support from, our closest friends, our family members. Sometimes we get it, sometimes we don't. But if we don't get it, which is unfortunately a lot of the time, we have to understand that the reason we're doing it is not for them, it's for us. But also you need to understand that, it's not necessarily that, again, there are so many factors that could be at play here. But the most common ones are that, they care about you. And as much as it sucks to say, they know you and they've already judged you, and they either think that you might, get hurt in the process or fail, and they don't want to see that. Or, and at a deeper level, it's either this or they're happy for you, but they don't want things to change. So they're so rooted in change. Well, wait, if Jeremy does this big book launch and he becomes famous, what does that mean for me? Which is, and again, none of these are conscious levels or done consciously to hurt one another. It's just that we're either trying to protect the person or we're trying to protect our relationship with the person. And when we realize that, that's why things like sending out like an excerpt of the book to peers and to other people that aren't necessarily really close to your social circle is a good idea, just because then you'll be able to get some unbiased kind of feedback. Because again, it's like forest for the trees, right?
Yes.
They're standing right in front of the tree. You're saying, I'm going to be a forest. And they're looking at the tree, and maybe, I don't know, maybe they see the tree's got birds' nests in it and it's got, a little bit of the duty, draining down the tree or whatever. They can't see the whole vision of what it's going to be like in the end.
Yeah, yeah. You're absolutely right. And you hit the nail on the head in certain regards. And one of those being, after writing the book now, we explore writings from people from the past and philosophers. And this would have been more insightful had I done this sooner in my life. But, some of the mistakes I made, and hopefully your viewers will learn from my mistakes. Move around in silence and don't advertise anything. Do it for yourself. And the other one is become a ghost, to disappear. These are all themes that you're starting to hear more now. It's becoming more prevalent now, with YouTube and Stoicism, and you start hearing a lot of inspirational speakers who touch on this. Uh, I I didn't stumble upon that information before. It's just these are things that I'm learning on my own, and then you go. So other great minds have said this before. It's nothing new here, and I wish that I had done that. So that's something I should have done. Like I was proud of a project, meaning the book, or even acting projects. I was proud of it and wanted to tell other people about it who, I thought were in my corner, and wanted to bring them along for the ride without realizing that, this eventually affected the dynamic of a relationship for reasons that you presented. You presented a variety of reasons, and I would have to say that, they're all valid. They're all valid. So I almost feel like, do I not say this? Do I say? But I mean, the project's already done. 2 years ago, I worked on a project for a film. It was a film project, and I didn't realize, but as we speak right now, I'm preparing for the film premiere, which is going to be the International Film Festival of Ottawa. So the IFFO, the International Film Festival of Ottawa, we're having our film premiere for Greenhorn on Thursday. It's happening this week on March the 13th. And then the Toronto premiere happens at the Scotiabank Theatre on Saturday, March the 29th. And those are two film fests that I'll be attending for the premiere. I guess the point that I'm trying to bring here is this. I worked on those projects a couple years ago, didn't mention to it to anybody, and I guess my step in the right direction is I'm just going to appear on the red carpet, and that's that. Whereas in the past, the old Jeremy would have been telling people about this months in advance, and there would have been a hype about it. Time out. If anything, if they notice that I'm there, then great. But you know what? Yeah, move around in the dark. Be quiet about it. Do your projects on your own. Become a ghost. Disappear. And when it's time for a premiere or a launch for a book, it happens. And people will hear about it because it's in the public domain, it's in the public realm. So word would have to get out about it, or I'd have to definitely, publicize it to a certain extent. But the old me would have been talking about this months in advance with hype. Don't do that. Don't. At least for me, I learned to not do that.
Like that. Jeremy, this has been a really great conversation. Could probably go on for another couple hours, but
Yeah.
we are coming up pretty close to the time. Is there anything that you wish I would have asked but didn't ask, or anything you feel we should have covered but didn't cover today?
You know what? I'll tell you this. Firstly, I want to thank you for bringing me on your platform. Number two, I'll try to be really fast. We talked about my web series. When I started a web series called the Turnbuckle Club, which was really designed to teach students how to write about sports and to read about sports and marketing. And we decided to explore the realm of pro wrestling, mixed martial arts, and boxing. And to touch on your show and the theme of the show and procrastination. One of my favorite interviews was with George St. Pierre, GSP from Montreal, Quebec. He's got to go out there on the Mount Rushmore of mixed martial arts greats. Okay, he goes up there with guys like the Anderson Silvas, the Hoist Gracies, and he's going to go down as probably the greatest Canadian mixed martial artist of all time. And he overcame a lot of obstacles as a child, and something that I learned from him. I met him on two occasions, and I'll talk about the second occasion when I was in Montreal. I went to visit the dojo to take in a class, and it was after one of those big holidays. It was either after Christmas or it was after New Year's Eve. So it was either January 2nd, January 1st, or it would have been Boxing Day. But either way, it was one of those days when most people have the proverbial hangover. And I showed up there to meet a friend that I acted with on a show called The Listener. I wanted to say hi to him because I was in town and taking a class, but he wasn't there. And I saw maybe 5 people in a dojo on one of those days. And one of them was George St. Pierre simply working on the jab. So when we're talking about the world champion and the elite and the guys that differentiate themselves from the pretenders, from the contenders, and the champions, there he was after one of the major holidays when most people are sleeping in, waking up with a hangover or a buzz. And he was working on just the most basic move in boxing, which was just a jab. And how does that relate or connect with everything that we're talking about here? Hey, as a procrastinator, you wake up the next day, you're not here to conquer the world. Just work on the most basic things, and it accumulates. One victory after another leads to you becoming a champ one day. And I remember, I'll always remember that as one of the takeaways from something that people would not know, they would not see. They say that champions are made when no one's looking. It's a lot of great things, a lot of great virtues that people display are done when the cameras aren't around. And that was just one example of something that I took away from exploring the world of mixed martial arts. And the same would go for a lot of names in pro wrestling and boxing. But I just want to share that with you when it comes to what did you take away from mixed martial arts, or you talk about your web series and MMA. I just figured I'd just share that story because that one lends itself to our topic and to what we talk about here on this platform.
No, I definitely love that, and it is so true. Just work on the basic things every day, and the rest sort of follows. It doesn't have to be complicated.
Yeah, yeah, and I brought that up just because of the following, just because I figured it was fitting because in the world of fight, a fight is emblematic of life. It is. It's a metaphor for life. Your greatest opponent is looking at you in the mirror. The difference between the world of boxing and MMA and real life is that, at least in the world of MMA and boxing, there are rules. Whereas in life, people get away with cheap shots, and you're brought down to your knees, and somehow you still got to pick yourself up. But thankfully, with platforms like yours and this channel and your show, we can help people overcome certain obstacles and, hey, get them one step closer to that championship title.
Sounds great, Jeremy. Thank you so much for being on the show
Thank you so
again.
much. I really appreciate
We're
your time.
No problem, and we are going to get those links to the book as well as your website and some socials. We're going to put those in the show notes for you.
Thank you so much.
And once again, to our listeners, thank you for tuning in. And just remember, if you can't find that motivation or inspiration for yourself today, maybe just go out and try to be that motivation and inspiration for someone else. And we'll see you again next time.
Awesome. Thank you.